My name is David Litt. I'm a professor here in the law school, and I'm the Gakushu Shido Iensho of the LL.M. program. So I'm working with Yamamoto Sensei, Watai Sensei, and the Gakuseibu to plan the curriculum. And I teach usually 4 courses in the spring and 4 in the fall. One of the courses that I teach is called Corporate Governance and Risk Management. The course was developed by my predecessor here in the law school, Jerry McAllen, with a lawyer named Katsuya Natori, who also is a University of Chicago LL.M. Another university, University of Washington LL.M., part of the University of Washington connection, and was on the panel here yesterday, actually. But Natori Sensei was one of the first bengoshi in Japan to go work inside a corporation in the corporate legal department. He was the general counsel in Japan for several large international companies, I think most recently IBM Japan. And then since he left IBM Japan, he's been he's had his own law firm, and he's been a kansaiyaku, a statutory auditor. He was brought in, for example, to Olympus after Olympus had its scandal to help clean up the corporate governance. So he's an expert on corporate governance and compliance. And so this course was developed. Jerry used to call the class, Jerry McAllen used to call the class, How to be an In-House Counsel. So it's focused because the in-house counsel role in Japan was a new role, and so it's not something that is commonly known in Japan. It's actually not that old in the United States, but I think goes back, really in-house lawyers became prominent starting in the 1980s, so about 20 years earlier in the United States. This year, I am teaching the class together with a bengoshi named Koji Tsurumi, who is the lead lawyer for Johnson & Johnson, major pharmaceutical and healthcare company in North Asia for several of their businesses, and in Japan, I think he's Daihyo Torishimariyaku also for their Japanese company. So of course, if you're in a pharmaceutical healthcare business, it's a heavily regulated business where you have to worry about compliance with law in everything you do. So I want to talk a little bit about the general compliance environment that companies face, and focus on 1 or 2 interesting things that have happened primarily in the United States. But of course, even if you are a Japanese company, or a European company, or Asian company, you need to worry about the United States. One example is Volkswagen. Does anyone know what's happened to Volkswagen recently around the world? What their problem is? What their big scandal, big crisis? No? It's called, sometimes they call it Dieselgate, or except what happened is Volkswagen has very, very successful passenger cars that have a diesel engine. They don't sell them in Japan, so Japan has not been part of this scandal. They sell a few in the United States, but they sell most of them in Europe. The problem with diesel engines is you can make a diesel engine that has low pollution. You can make a diesel engine that has high mileage, fuel economy. Or you can make a diesel engine that has high power. You can't make one that does all 3. In fact, you can only do 2 of the 3. Because if you cut the pollution, it actually hurts the mileage and the power. So Volkswagen figured this out, and together with their software providers, they figured out a clever way that if the car was being tested for the pollution, for the emission controls. And it's put on a pedestal where it's on rollers and it's sitting in one place, and they plug something in the tailpipe and see how much pollution is coming out, that the sensors, the software would realize that it was being tested. It wasn't moving, it wasn't accelerating or slowing down, and it would be very, very low pollution. So it passed the pollution tests. But then when you took the car out on the road, the drivers want high mileage and high power, and they don't care about the pollution. So what happened was these cars, when they're out on the road, sometimes they'd have 10 times or 100 times the pollution coming out that they were allowed to. This is a huge problem for Volkswagen, and it's destroyed the future of diesel as a powertrain for automobiles. Still in trucks, but you won't see many diesel passenger cars in the future because of this scandal. The number of people who might have been killed, people who have asthma, people who have emphysema, who live in a city where there's lots of excess pollution. There are estimates that say easily 50,000, 100,000 people died earlier than they otherwise would have because of the extra pollution from these cars. Where are these cars sold? They're sold in Europe. 90% of them are sold in Europe. Where is Volkswagen paying money? They're not paying the money in Europe. They're paying the money in the United States. I was just looking. They paid, $25 billion in the United States, right? How many years of profits does it take for Volkswagen to make $25 billion? That's, at least 5 to 10 years of profits, right, for a successful company. And they didn't sell very many cars in the United States. There's a tiny number of these cars in the United States, but the US regulator was much, much tougher. The US regulator was tougher on them, and that's where their compliance risk was. So if you're an in-house lawyer and you're dealing with compliance, you need to understand which regulator you're dealing with. I wanted to plug that in so you can actually see. Something up there. See if that's there. I think I just didn't have it connected well. No. That's not good. What about all my nice pictures that I brought here? Yeah, let me see if we can get it, because it's, yeah, why don't I'll turn it off and let me turn that off, and then turn that on again. Let's see. Again, the projector is coming on. Yeah, it's not loose. No, that's upside down. That's good. Anyway, I'm not sure. Maybe my attachment may not be working. I wonder, Saji-san, could you go upstairs and get another one of these? Because this is my individual one. They have the Mac adapter. Can you just ask them for one of these? Because it could be the adapter. I don't usually use this PC. Anyway, so they paid $25 billion in the United States. In Germany and in Europe, where they sold 10 times the number of cars, I think they had like $5 billion initially. They're now getting more serious penalties in Europe. But it turned out that their risk was in a market where they weren't selling many cars. And And that's, I think, not so surprising that the financial risk in the United States is much, much higher. And that's something, it depends on the area of regulation. Let's talk a little bit, what would be some major risks, major areas where you might end up as a company paying a lot of money or having a lot of damage to your reputation, that would be sort of a bet the company risk. Any ideas? What types of things have you seen companies get in trouble for? Data protection, yes. Data breach is a big one, right? That was going to be #1 on my list, actually, because you can think of so many companies. In Japan, maybe Benesse had a big one that hurt their reputation a lot. In the US, there's a credit rating agency called Equifax that has basically most Americans' financial information, social security number, everything you need to steal someone's identity. And they had a data breach where 150 million Americans' information was stolen by somebody. We don't know who. And then the response to it basically made everybody very, very angry. So their reputation is essentially destroyed. Let's see if that one works. The other one was not. Like connecting. No? Looks like it should be. There. Okay, good. Now we just need to mirror the screens and then it will work. Okay. Okay, there. That's more like it. Okay. I have some lovely photos I want to show you. It's like I've got a gallery of rogues I want to show later on. So the data breach would be a good example, right? There have been lots of companies that Marriott Hotels acquired someone called Starwood, another hotel holder, and it turned out that Starwood had been hacked. So Marriott did a fine job, but they acquired a company that had been hacked, and then a year later realized that everyone's credit card information who'd stayed in any of the Starwood hotels for the last 5 years had been stolen. Yahoo, not Yahoo Japan, but Yahoo US was hacked, and everyone who had Yahoo email in the US, basically people got access to their email, stole all their information, everything you put in your emails, your password, your email, all your counterparties' emails. And it happened, there was one hack in 2013, I think, and the other was maybe 2014 or 15. They didn't disclose this or even discover it until they sold the company to Verizon a year or two later. Verizon paid $5 billion for Yahoo, and then they bought a company that had negative goodwill, that nobody wanted to do business with. 2014-15, who did the hack? It was the same people in the Russian intelligence agency, GRU, who hacked the US election. Who hacked the Democrats' email in 2016, the GRU. If you look at the same person is named, who's indicted by Special Counsel Mueller for both these hacks, actually. Who did it in 2013? Nobody knows, right? So, so data breaches are a huge area, but they're not the only area. Another area where you might have huge liability, antitrust cartel, right? Foreign companies get in trouble with antitrust in the US all the time. And Japanese companies, Korean companies have a long history of getting in antitrust troubles. Because the sanctions in Japan, even if there's an antitrust law, the sanctions are not as tough. In the US, executives go to jail. Foreign executives go to jail. Companies pay, $100 million fines easily. Same thing with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the FCPA. This is if you're bribing a foreign government official or keeping a slush fund, keeping some money off the books in your company to pay government officials. The best example, okay, and this law governs US companies, right? So you don't have to worry about it if you're a Japanese company. You worry about the Japanese unfair competition statute that has a similar provision, but nobody ever gets prosecuted. Very rarely any prosecution's brought and the fines aren't very big. So you don't have to worry about it if you're a Japanese company, right? Wrong. Of course you do. Hitachi, listed on the New York Stock Exchange. They got slammed for, they did a joint venture in South Africa. As part of the joint venture, they gave 25% interest in the joint venture to a company that was associated with the ruling party, with the African National Congress. Turns out that was really a gift to get business from the government. And they didn't account for it that way. And they paid, a very large fine. Panasonic, this happened last year. Panasonic had a subsidiary in the United States that makes avionics equipment, makes equipment for airline manufacturers that was selling something in Europe. And apparently paid some bribes, so they paid a very, very large settlement. It happens to foreign companies all the time. The biggest example is Siemens, German company. Makes power plants, turbines, things like that. Siemens, for many years, had a history in Asia and the Middle East of paying bribes and keeping money off the books so they could pay bribes. And they discovered this and reported it, and they paid fines of more than $1 billion in the US. Not only did they pay fines of $1 billion, but how much do you think they paid the lawyers and the accountants to investigate? This is if you're a lawyer and you can bring in this project to your law firm, you'll never need to bring in another project in your entire career, because they paid, I think, $500 million just to Debevoise and Plimpton, and almost as much to one of the big 4 accounting firms. So that's a lot of work for lawyers to figure out 25 years of bribes in these parts of the world. So there's a lot of risk with poor compliance. Improper financial statements, of course, is a major area. Accounting fraud, right, is a major area. Maybe you have a questionable business model. Sales practices. There's now a huge scandal in the United States involving painkillers that include opioids, opiate painkillers. There's something like 40,000 people died last year in the United States because of opiate painkillers. And the average lifespan of an American has declined for the first time since the 20th century because of these additional deaths. It's a public health crisis. And so they're looking at the practices that companies use to promote these products to doctors and get people addicted. Once you take these, you can't stop. And then when you can't get them anymore, you turn to heroin or illegal or stronger fentanyl, synthetic opioids, and eventually you take enough that you die. And many people are dying. And that's a result, and now some of the companies in this business, they're all being sued for hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, and their executives. There's a famous family, the Sackler family. If you go to a famous museum, you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, you go to the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., you can find the Sackler wing of a lot of these places. So the Sacklers are getting their names taken off of museums because of this scandal. So this is the environment you are in the United States. Any one of these can cripple your company. And they can happen anywhere around the world, but they happen more often in the US than in other places, just because that's the environment. Now I brought one thing I want to pass out. Maybe I'll start over here, and I won't talk about this for a few minutes, so you've got time to take one and pass them around. I think that's all, yeah, and I think I've got enough. It's just one page. So what has happened over my career to create this environment, and how has the environment changed? I want to talk about two things. One is how the Justice Department decides if they're going to charge you as a corporation or an individual. Hope you got the email. I'll give it to you later if you need it. The charging decision for the corporation and the executive, or the individual, right? Corporations are made up of individuals. Usually when a corporation does something wrong and it's criminal, there's a possibility that the company gets charged, and there's a possibility that the individual gets charged, right? Who do you think it's fairer if Volkswagen did this and they cheated on the tests? Do you think we should go after the company or should we go after the individuals? Anyone have a thought? Yes.
I think individual.
Individuals. Why would we go after the individuals?
Individual. If you're CEO, let's say CEO,
Yeah.
has a power, authority,
Yeah.
then it may be influenced by him. So that's why I think
Yeah.
we still have to go for the individual.
Yeah, I mean, the individuals, companies don't function without individuals making decisions, right? And you need to give individuals the right incentives, and when something goes wrong, you want individual responsibility. That's the only way you can really solve a problem, right? I think that makes sense. You know, sometimes it's very hard to figure out who made the decision, and the individual didn't get the money directly. The money went to the company, and the company needs to set up some structures to stop these things. There might be reasons why we want to punish both of them, depending on what went wrong, right? Why would you, what would make you more likely to go after the company instead of the individual?
Deeper pocket.
They've got more money, right? You know, yeah, the company, deeper pocket, unless, of course, the company went bankrupt because they paid $25 billion. But yes, usually the company has a deeper pocket. What else? Why else might you want to go after the company if you want to stop this sort of behavior from happening again? Yeah.
They have social, not respect, but they are a major group in society, and they have responsibilities.
Yeah, I mean, they should have some responsibility. It's their product. They're the ones who made the money. The money went to their shareholders. You know, I think the other reason is that the companies don't, you know, most of the, if it's the CEO, maybe the CEO makes decisions, but most of the individuals in the company are working within an ecosystem, and the ecosystem needs to work well, right? To stop this sort of thing from happening, you need to have good policies in place, and you need the policies to be enforced, and that's pretty hard for any one person to do, right? That's kind of a collective responsibility. So usually in companies, you will want to, you will want to have some kind of punishment for the company as well. And I mean, the company is benefiting usually directly from the activity as well. It's not, when Volkswagen sold all these cars, the consumers paid Volkswagen. They didn't pay the CEO. They didn't pay the engineer. The engineer, you know, who figured this out and did this software change, you know, he or she may not have gotten anything from it, right? May have just been doing the job, even if they were directly the one who came up with the idea that we can cheat these tests, right? So, so you may want to have responsibility for the company as well. Well, what I want to talk about is the way that this has shifted a little bit in the United States. Can I? Do you have a spare one of these? Or is this the last one?
Yeah. Put it down low.
Okay. Oh, there. Okay, great. Thanks. The history in the United States is that in the late 1990s, there was a telecom, media, and technology boom. It's the first internet boom, right? And there was the economy was really good. The stock market boomed. All of these new companies, the internet had just come out. Yahoo was doing very well, eBay, and then there was a bust, right? It turned out there was a lot of hype. There was a bubble. Investors got very excited, and then it turned out that companies went under. So some of the most well-known bankruptcies, one was Enron. Right? Enron was an energy company that did a lot of things, and it had a lot of accounting problems. Went under. Another one was WorldCom. WorldCom was a telecommunications company, mostly internet and long-distance phones and things like that. I don't know that they had much mobile phones, but mobile phones weren't a big thing back in the 1990s. Back when you guys were small children. So after this, there was a real panic, a real crisis in confidence in whether the company's accounting standards were accurate, and there was a lot of regulatory reform. There was something passed called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that we go into in great detail in this course. Some of these executives went to jail. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then the Justice Department said, well, we need to figure out when we're going to go after companies or not, and we want to give them some guidance. And the Deputy Attorney General in charge of this was someone named Thompson. And something came out in 2003 called the Thompson Memo, which explained to companies that when we look at whether you're going to get charged with a criminal offense or not, whether there's corporate responsibility, we're going to look at a number of factors. 3 years later, there was another memo called the McNulty Memo. What I've given you is actually a page from the McNulty Memo. And you can find it if you Google it in the Department of Justice. I'm sure you can find it on the web. And it goes into great detail on each of these 9 factors. But I think the thing I want to emphasize to you is a couple of these factors that I think we just talked about. Think about when you want to go after the company instead of the individual. Of course, you're looking at the nature and seriousness of the offense, factor number 1. For any crime, you're going to look at the nature and seriousness of the offense. That's not unique to corporations, right? The second one, the pervasiveness of wrongdoing within the corporation, including complicity in or condonation of the wrongdoing by management, right? We're looking at the attitude of management and how widespread is the problem within the company, right? Is this just one person who did something bad, or is it throughout the company? That makes sense. If it's one person, you want to go after the individual. If it's widespread and it's encouraged by the people at the top, then you better go after the company, right? The second is kind of similar. The corporation's history of similar conduct, including prior criminal, civil, or regulatory enforcement actions. Factor number 3. That makes sense. If they've done it before and they didn't learn and they do it again, you want to be tougher on them, right? The fourth factor is what's interesting. The corporation's timely and voluntary disclosure of wrongdoing and its willingness to cooperate in the investigation of its agents, right? So if you're an in-house counsel in Volkswagen and you find out about this problem with your emissions testing, you say, gee, if they catch us and we didn't tell them about it, they're going to go after us with everything they've got. But if we go in and we admit it, And we self-report, we do a thorough internal investigation, we find the problem, we fix it, and we go in a